There is a particular kind of loneliness that can exist even when someone is sleeping beside you. You know the feeling. You are sitting across from a woman you care about, listening to her talk, watching her face, noticing every little shift in her voice. And somehow, despite being physically close, something inside you feels strangely far away. So you try harder. You explain yourself more carefully. You send another message. You give more attention. You become more available. You try to become the man you think she wants. And for a moment it seems to work, then something changes. She pulls away, and suddenly you're analyzing everything. Did I say too much? Did I text too quickly? Was I too distant? Should I have been more confident? Maybe you replay the conversation while driving home, turning ordinary sentences into evidence, searching for the moment when the connection disappeared. But here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the problem wasn't that you weren't enough. Maybe the problem was that you abandoned too much of yourself trying to be enough. And this is where intelligence becomes surprisingly dangerous, because a smart man can rationalize almost anything. He can turn insecurity into strategy. He can turn fear into analysis. He can turn attachment into obsession and call it love. He can study human behavior so intensely that he forgets the person standing in front of him is not a puzzle to solve. And perhaps the deepest lesson isn't about how to get women to like you. It's about what happens to a man when he becomes so desperate to be chosen that he stops choosing himself. Human beings have been struggling with this for thousands of years. Long before dating apps, text messages, social media, or the strange modern ritual of staring at a screen and wondering why someone hasn't replied. People were trying to answer the same ancient question. How do I become worthy of love without losing myself in the process? The question appeared in different forms across civilizations. The Greeks argued about desire, virtue, beauty, and self-mastery. The Stoics warned that the moment you make your peace dependent upon something outside your control, you have handed another person the keys to your emotional life. Buddhist traditions would eventually examine attachment from another direction, asking what happens when the mind turns desire into possession. Nietzsche looked at the hidden motives beneath morality and social behavior, reminding us that human beings are rarely as transparent to themselves as they imagine. And Carl Jung spent much of his life exploring the hidden psychological forces that shape attraction, projection, identity, and the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. Different cultures, different centuries, different vocabularies. But underneath them was the same strange human problem. We want another person to make us feel whole. And sometimes, without realizing it, we begin asking them to carry a weight they were never designed to carry. This is why there are certain things an intelligent man should never do with a woman he loves, desires, or hopes to build a life with. Not because women are mysterious creatures who require special rules. Not because men should play games. And certainly not because relationships are some kind of battlefield where one person has to dominate the other. Quite the opposite. These things matter because a healthy relationship requires two people who remain psychologically alive inside it. Two people, not one person and one emotional hostage. The first mistake is perhaps the most seductive of all. A smart man should never turn a woman into a problem he needs to solve. Your mind loves puzzles. That's one of the reasons you're intelligent. When something doesn't make sense, you investigate. You collect information. You compare patterns. You search for causes. And when a woman behaves differently than you expected, your mind can become a detective. She was warm yesterday. Today she seems distant. Why? Her message had a period instead of an exclamation point. Why? She watched your story but didn't respond. What does that mean? You begin creating theories, and the more uncertain you feel, the more theories you create. Psychologists have long recognized how uncomfortable the human mind is with ambiguity. When information is incomplete, we instinctively try to close the gap. We would rather have a wrong explanation than no explanation at all. And relationships are filled with ambiguity. A person can be tired, distracted, afraid, confused, bossy, processing something unrelated to you, or simply changing their mind. But when you're emotionally invested, uncertainty feels personal. So you create a story, and once you've created the story, you start responding to the story instead of the human being. This is where intelligence can become a trap. Because you can construct an explanation for almost anything. The woman is losing interest. She's testing you. She's afraid of intimacy. She's playing games. She's manipulating you. She secretly wants commitment. She secretly doesn't. Perhaps one explanation is true. Perhaps none of them are. And here's the strange thing. The more intelligent you are, the easier it can become to defend your favorite interpretation. You can build an entire courtroom inside your head. Evidence, counter-evidence, argument, predictions. But love is not a courtroom. Sometimes the healthiest response to uncertainty is not another theory, it's a conversation. Hey, I've noticed some distance. Is everything okay? And then you listen, not to find ammunition, not to confirm your suspicion, just to hear what is actually being said. Because one of the most sophisticated forms of intelligence is knowing when your mind has become too clever for its own good. The second thing a smart man should never do is sacrifice his identity to keep a woman. This one often begins beautifully. You fall in love, your priorities shift, you want to spend more time together, you discover new interests, you compromise. That's normal, that's intimacy. But somewhere along the way, compromise can quietly become self-erasure. You stop seeing your friends because she doesn't like them. You abandon your hobbies because she doesn't understand them. You stop pursuing your ambitions because they require time away from the relationship. You change your opinions because disagreement feels dangerous. You become whoever seems easiest to love, and perhaps nobody notices immediately, not even you. But slowly, something inside you goes quiet. There is a difference between becoming more flexible and becoming less yourself. One is maturity, the other is disappearance. The philosopher Nietzsche was deeply interested in the danger of living according to values you did not choose for yourself. And this matters in relationships, because love can create an enormous temptation to outsource your identity. You begin asking, consciously or unconsciously, what does she want me to be? What would make her stay? What version of me would make her happiest? But there is another question. Who am I when nobody is approving of me? That question can be uncomfortable. Because a man who has spent years building his identity around external validation eventually discovers that he doesn't know what remains when the validation disappears. This is why Marcus Aurelius and the Stoic tradition placed such importance on an inner center. Not emotional coldness, not indifference, an internal place from which you can act without being completely controlled by applause, rejection, fear, or desire. A woman should be able to influence your life. She should not have to become the author of your identity. And the same principle applies in reverse. A healthy relationship isn't two people becoming one indistinguishable person. It's two people becoming more fully themselves while choosing to walk together. The third mistake is subtler. Never use money, gifts, status, intelligence, or generosity as a substitute for emotional honesty. This is especially dangerous for capable men, because competence gets rewarded everywhere else. At work, if there's a problem, you solve it. If something breaks, you fix it. If someone needs help, you provide it. So when emotional discomfort appears inside a relationship, your instinct may be to do something, buy something, plan something, work harder, provide more, give more. And generosity is beautiful. But sometimes generosity becomes avoidance wearing expensive clothes. You don't want to have the difficult conversation, so you take her somewhere nice. You don't want to admit you're insecure, so you become excessively protective. You don't want to acknowledge that the relationship is failing, so you keep investing. You keep adding effort to something that may require truth. There is an ancient human tendency to confuse sacrifice with love. We think that if something costs us enough, it must be meaningful. But pain is not proof of love, exhaustion is not proof of devotion, and financial investment is certainly not proof of emotional connection. Sometimes the most loving thing a man can say is not, "I'll give you more." It's, "We need to be honest about what is happening between us." That sentence can be terrifying, because honesty removes your ability to control the outcome, but perhaps that's precisely why it matters. The fourth thing a smart man should never do is tolerate disrespect, simply because he is afraid of losing the relationship. This is where self-respect and ego are often confused. Self-respect doesn't mean needing to win every argument. It doesn't mean being dominant. It doesn't mean walking away the moment someone disagrees with you. A relationship without disagreement isn't necessarily healthy. It may simply be one where somebody is afraid to speak. Self-respect means knowing the difference between conflict and contempt, between imperfection and repeated humiliation, between a mistake and a pattern, between someone having a bad day and someone consistently treating you as though your dignity is negotiable. And this is important because fear can distort perception. When you are deeply attached to someone, you may begin negotiating against yourself. You tell yourself, "She didn't mean it, she's under pressure. I can handle it. It isn't that bad. Maybe I'm being too sensitive." Sometimes those things are true. And sometimes they're simply the stories we tell ourselves, because accepting reality would force us to make a difficult decision. This is one reason psychological awareness matters. Your brain doesn't merely perceive reality, it interprets it. And the interpretation is influenced by what you desperately want to be true. If you desperately want a relationship to survive, your mind can become an excellent lawyer for the relationship. It will defend evidence it would reject if it belonged to someone else. Have you ever given a friend advice about their relationship and thought, why can't they see what is happening? Then later realized you were doing the exact same thing. That is the human mind. It can see patterns clearly from a distance. But when your own heart is involved, the picture becomes harder to read. The fifth mistake is trying to control a woman's feelings. This is perhaps where modern dating culture becomes especially confusing. There are entire industries built around the idea that attraction can be engineered. Say this. Don't say that, wait 3 hours. Don't text first, make her jealous. Appear unavailable, create scarcity. Trigger curiosity, manipulate uncertainty. And some of these tactics may produce short-term reactions. Human psychology is real. Scarcity affects perception. Uncertainty can intensify attention. Intermittent reinforcement can create powerful attachment. But creating psychological tension is not the same thing as creating love. You can manipulate someone's attention. You cannot manufacture genuine intimacy. And if your relationship depends on constantly managing another person's emotional state, you aren't experiencing freedom. You're running a control system. Yuval Noah Harari has written extensively about the stories and systems humans construct to organize behavior. One of the strange features of modern life is that we increasingly live inside invisible systems of signals, metrics, incentives, rankings, and feedback. Dating has absorbed some of this machinery. Followers, likes, matches, response times, ride receipts. Algorithms, the human heart, which evolved in small communities over thousands of generations, is now receiving constant numerical feedback about its social value. And that can make relationships feel like markets. Who has more options? Who has more status? Who replied first? Who cares less? Who has the upper hand? But the moment you turn intimacy into a competition, someone has already lost. Usually both people, because the goal of love is not to become impossible to replace. The goal is to build something where neither person feels the need to replace the other. The sixth thing a smart man should never do is confuse obsession with depth. This is a dangerous one, because obsession can feel profound. You think about her constantly. You check your phone. You imagine your future together. You analyze her words. You miss her even when you just saw her. Your nervous system is activated. Your attention is consumed. And you think, this must be love. But sometimes what feels like extraordinary connection is simply extraordinary uncertainty. Neuroscience gives us an important clue here. The brain's reward systems are highly responsive not only to pleasure, but to anticipation, novelty, and unpredictable rewards. That means inconsistency can sometimes create stronger psychological fixation than consistency. You don't know when the next message will come. You don't know whether she's emotionally available. You don't know where you stand. So your brain keeps checking. Maybe now. Maybe now. Maybe now. And every small signal becomes emotionally significant. This can create a strange illusion. The relationship feels incredibly intense. But intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. A storm is intense. A deep river is quiet. Sometimes the healthiest relationship you've ever experienced will initially feel less dramatic, precisely because your nervous system isn't constantly fighting for reassurance. There is nothing cinematic about emotional safety, no dramatic music, no midnight interrogation of text messages, no exhilarating uncertainty, just two people who can breathe. And perhaps, after years of confusing anxiety with passion, peace can feel almost boring, until you realize that peace was what you were searching for all along. The seventh thing a smart man should never do is make a woman responsible for healing wounds she did not create. This is one of the hardest lessons in intimacy. We all bring history into relationships. The child who wasn't praised becomes the adult who needs constant reassurance. The person who was betrayed becomes hypervigilant. The person who was abandoned becomes terrified of distance. The person who learned that love had to be earned becomes a performer. And when someone finally comes along who matters, those old wounds can awaken. Suddenly, a delayed text doesn't feel like a delayed text. It feels like abandonment. A disagreement doesn't feel like a disagreement. It feels like rejection. A request for space doesn't feel like space. It feels like the beginning of the end. The woman in front of you may have triggered the wound, but that doesn't necessarily mean she created it. This distinction can transform relationships. Because when you understand it, you stop demanding that another person constantly prove that your past will never happen again. You begin taking responsibility for your own emotional history. That doesn't mean becoming emotionally isolated. It means being able to say, this situation brought something up in me, and I know this feeling is bigger than what is happening right now. That's emotional adulthood, not never being triggered, recognizing the trigger. Jung's work repeatedly returned to the idea that what remains unconscious tends to influence us from behind the curtain. We think we are choosing, but sometimes old fears are choosing for us. And the more unaware we are of those forces, the more likely we are to project them onto the person we love. We accuse them of intentions they never had. We punish them for injuries they never caused. We ask them to repair a childhood they never witnessed. And eventually, both people become exhausted. The eighth mistake is abandoning curiosity once you think you know her. This sounds harmless, but it may be one of the quietest killers of long-term intimacy. At first, you ask questions. What does she dream about? What scares her? What did she want to become when she was a child? What makes her feel alive? What does she regret? What does she secretly hope nobody ever notices about her? Then time passes. You think you know. And because you think you know, you stop asking. But people are not statues. They change. The person you fell in love with at 25 may not be the same person at 35. The person at 40 may have different fears than the person at 30. Life changes people. Loss changes people. Success changes people. Parenthood changes people. Failure changes people. Illness, aging, friendship, ambition, grief, travel, technology, and time all leave fingerprints on identity. And if you love someone, you have to keep meeting the person they are becoming, not merely remembering the person they were. This is where modern life creates another strange contradiction. We have more ways than ever to communicate. Yet many people feel less deeply known. We send messages all day. We share photos. We send reactions. We know what someone ate for lunch. We know where they traveled. We know what music they played. And still, we may not know what they are afraid to say out loud. Information isn't intimacy. Access isn't understanding. Knowing someone's location doesn't mean knowing their inner world. The deepest relationships are not built by collecting more data about each other. They're built by remaining curious about the consciousness behind the data. And then comes the ninth. Perhaps the most important one. A smart man should never stay in a relationship simply because leaving would mean admitting that he was wrong. This is where intelligence can become pride. You invested years. You introduced her to your family. You built a home. You made plans. You defended the relationship to your friends. You told yourself this was the person. So when reality begins contradicting the story, your mind resists. Because leaving doesn't just mean losing a relationship. It can feel like losing an identity. You begin thinking about sunk costs. All that time, all that effort, all those memories, all those sacrifices. But time already spent is not an argument for spending more. A past decision does not become wise simply because you continue it. There is something deeply human about wanting our lives to form a coherent story. We want the chapters to make sense. We want to believe that the suffering had a purpose. But sometimes the meaning of a chapter is simply that it taught you what you could not have learned any other way. This is where existential philosophy becomes practical. You cannot always choose what happens. But you participate in choosing what you do with what happened. That doesn't mean every difficult relationship should end. Quite the opposite. Real relationships require patience, forgiveness, growth, humility. There will be seasons when both people are tired. There will be misunderstandings. There will be moments when love feels less like fireworks and more like carrying groceries through the rain. But there is a difference between a difficult relationship that two people are willing to repair and the relationship where only one person is doing the repairing. There is a difference between temporary pain and permanent erosion. And there is a difference between fighting for love and fighting against reality. So perhaps the question isn't, how do I keep her? Maybe the better question is, who do I become when I am with her? Do you become more honest, more courageous, more patient, more alive? Can you speak without performing? Can you disagree without fearing abandonment? Can you celebrate her independence without feeling threatened? Can she tell you the truth without worrying that your ego will punish her? Can you tell her the truth without trying to control her reaction? Can both of you remain separate human beings while building something together? Those questions reveal far more about the quality of a relationship than chemistry ever will. Because chemistry can bring two people together. Character determines what happens after they arrive. And this is where the ancient world meets the modern one. For most of human history, relationships were embedded inside families, tribes, villages, religions, economic systems, and social expectations. Today, many people live with unprecedented personal choice. That sounds liberating, and it is. But freedom has a psychological price. When there are endless possibilities, every choice becomes haunted by the possibility of a better one. Technology intensifies this. You can be sitting beside someone you love, while your phone quietly reminds you that millions of other people exist. Someone younger, someone richer, someone more attractive, someone more adventurous, someone who seems happier, someone whose carefully edited life appears perfect. The human brain wasn't designed to compare itself against an endless global catalog of human beings. And yet, every day, we do exactly that. This creates a strange modern dissatisfaction. You don't necessarily leave because your relationship is terrible. Sometimes you leave because you have become convinced that something better must exist. And the algorithm doesn't need to tell you this directly. It only needs to keep showing you possibilities. The result is that some people become addicted not to people, but to potential. Potential is intoxicating. A real person has flaws. Potential has none. A real relationship has boring Tuesday nights. Potential always looks exciting. A real woman will eventually disappoint you. A fantasy woman never does. A real man will have limitations. A fantasy man is infinitely capable. And so modern people can become consumers of imagined relationships. They aren't rejecting love. They're rejecting the ordinary imperfection required for love to become real. Harari's broader work often examines how human beings create shared stories that allow enormous societies to function. But intimate relationships expose a more personal version of the same phenomenon. We live inside stories about ourselves. I'm the guy who always gets rejected. I'm the guy who doesn't need anyone. I'm the man who has to be strong. I'm the man women always leave. I'm the man who can never trust. I'm the man who has to provide. I'm the man who is too intelligent for ordinary relationships. Be careful, because once an identity becomes sacred, you will unconsciously collect evidence to protect it. And then your relationships begin serving your story instead of challenging it. A man who believes he is unlovable may choose people who confirm it. A man who believes women cannot be trusted may interpret every ambiguity as betrayal. A man who believes he must dominate may mistake vulnerability for weakness. A man who believes he needs nobody may secretly spend his entire life hoping someone will finally prove him wrong. The mind is extraordinarily creative when protecting an identity. So perhaps becoming a wiser man isn't about learning more tricks. Maybe it's about becoming less interested in defending the version of yourself you've already constructed. This is where self-observation becomes more valuable than self-improvement. Instead of asking, how can I become more attractive? Sometimes ask, why do I need her attraction so badly? Instead of how do I make her chase me? Ask, why does being chased make me feel valuable? Instead of how do I stop caring? Ask, what am I afraid would happen if I allowed myself to care without trying to control the outcome? Those questions go deeper. And they don't produce instant answers. That's the point. The goal isn't to turn yourself into some perfectly detached philosopher who never gets jealous, never becomes insecure, never needs reassurance, and never gets hurt. That person probably doesn't exist. And if he did, he might not be very interesting. Wisdom isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to remain conscious while emotion is happening. You can feel jealousy without obeying it. You can feel fear without turning it into control. You can feel desire without turning it into possession. You can love someone deeply without making their response the measurement of your worth. That may be one of the most difficult forms of freedom available to a human being. To love without owning. To care without controlling. To stay without begging. To live without hatred. To give without keeping score. To receive without becoming dependent. And perhaps, above everything else, to remain yourself. So I want you to think about something. When was the last time you behaved differently around a woman because you were afraid of what she might think of the real you? Maybe you became quieter. Maybe you became funnier. Maybe you became more impressive. Maybe you pretended not to care. Maybe you cared far too much. Maybe you tried to become the version of yourself you believed would be impossible to leave. And if that's happened to you, you're not broken. You're human. The desire to be loved is not weakness. It is one of the oldest forces in our species. The mistake is not wanting love. The mistake is believing that you must abandon yourself to receive it. There is a man somewhere tonight sitting beside the woman he loves, wondering why he feels alone. There is another man staring at a phone, waiting for a message. Another is staying in a relationship because he is terrified of starting over. Another is pretending he doesn't care, because caring once hurt him. Another is giving everything he has because he believes generosity will finally make someone stay. And another has become so obsessed with being the perfect man that he has forgotten how to simply be a human being. Maybe you recognize yourself in one of them. Maybe that's why you're still listening. If you do, remember this. You do not need to become less loving. You need to become more conscious of what your love is doing. Is it expanding you or shrinking you? Is it bringing you closer to reality or deeper into fantasy? Is it helping two people become more honest or teaching both of you how to perform? Is your relationship built on freedom or fear? Because the healthiest love doesn't feel like a cage with comfortable furniture. It feels like two people standing beside each other with the doors unlocked. both capable of leaving, both choosing to stay. Not because they are trapped, not because they are terrified of being alone, but because, day after day, they look at one another and quietly say, I see who you are. I know you're imperfect. I know I'm imperfect. And I still choose this. Maybe that's what maturity looks like. Not finally figuring women out, not mastering attraction, not learning how to manipulate desire, but finally understanding yourself well enough that you no longer need another person to complete the story you tell about who you are. And when you reach that place, something unexpected happens. You become easier to love, not because you've learned how to perform, but because there is less performance, less strategy, less fear, less pretending. You can listen.